city of Atlanta has a rich and storied history, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement. Today, Atlanta is a sprawling hub of industry with the world's busiest airport. But where there is big business, there is also corruption. And for one local politician, a valiant attempt to clean it all up would lead to a shocking crime. Burned to the ground at the end of the Civil War, Atlanta quickly rose from the ashes to become a major metropolis. It's now headquarters to some of the world's largest companies and boasts elite universities like Emory, Georgia Tech, Morehouse, and Spelman. But Atlanta's rise to prominence has also been complicated by a history of racial tension.
The situation was a lot different back in the 1960s, a lot different. All goes back to the race riots and the trauma of all that.
We have a lot of history here. We have the birthplace of Dr. Martin Luther King. We also have Ebenezer Baptist Church, where he and his forefathers taught at. Neighborhoods are integrated. It's not in a separation as it was previously. So to me, it's much more unity.
Nearly 6 million people live in the greater metropolitan area, stretching out over 30 miles.
Atlanta is one of the largest cities in the U.S., and it has truly become what everybody calls it now as the Black Mecca.
Wherever you go, it's history all around. And it's expanding more and more. We also have different businesses coming here.
Over the past 30 years, Atlanta has become a major center for music, filmmaking, and cultural events.
It's huge here in Atlanta. I'm proud of the fact that we've got 3 of the top HBCUs in the country. Atlanta is considered the new Hollywood, specifically the new Black Hollywood. It's an amazing city in regards to culture and arts and restaurants and fashion and economics. It's a great city.
But all of Atlanta's explosive growth would come with a darker side effect of corruption, scandal, and violence. And one local leader would pay the ultimate price. December 15th, 2000. Just after 11 p.m., the DeKalb County Police Department receives a frantic 911 call from a woman named Phyllis Brown. She says her husband, 46-year-old Derwin Brown, has just been shot in the front yard.
There had been neighbors that had called 911 as well because they had heard the gunshots, and you could hear sirens in the background coming to the home.
First responders raced to the scene, but unfortunately, it's already too late.
There was no way that paramedics were going to revive him. He had been shot 12 times and was bleeding out.
I got this phone call. I said, Derwin has been shot. I never will forget. It was raining so hard, you couldn't hardly see off the hood of the car. When I walked in the hospital, this nurse met me and said he didn't make it. It's like something just went blank.
In a city as large as Atlanta, shootings are an unfortunate reality. But this one is immediately cause for concern because Derwin Brown is the newly elected sheriff of DeKalb County.
It shocked, veteran law enforcement because this kind of stuff don't happen.
You would think that, certain people would be untouchable. How is that possible?
But is this just a random act of violence or something more sinister?
They shot my dad like 11, 12, 13 times. In my driveway, on my mother's birthday. It's cold-blooded.
Born on June 22, 1954, Derwin Brown spent his formative years in Hempstead, New York. And from before he'd even graduated high school, he seemed destined for a life of politics.
From the era that he was born and grew up in Long Island, you know, civil rights and Black Panther movement and all these things that are positive, it helped him be a strong individual to stand up and fight.
He's always had that seriousness about him, and he's always had pride in who he was.
Every summer, Derwin and his siblings would go to Atlanta to spend time with their aunt. And it was on one of these trips that he met the woman he would eventually marry.
His aunt attended the same church that my mother attended, so that's how they met.
The reason why she really resonated with him was because she was as strong as he was.
My mother was from Atlanta, born and raised, 4th Ward, as they call it. She was gorgeous, intelligent, and very feisty.
It didn't take long for Derwin to realize that Phyllis was the one.
He would talk about dates and when he and Phyllis would go out, and he would say, man, I had met other women, but I had never seen anyone like Phyllis.
People were a little hesitant about the relationship because it moved so quickly, but they were in love.
After completing a degree in sociology and criminal justice, Derwin moved to the Peach State to be with Phyllis for good. The two got married in 1977 and settled in the town of Decatur to start a family.
Decatur is a small town in a big county. We had some of the wealthiest people in Georgia and then some of the more challenged people. It was a wonderful place to live and to raise a family. You would see community leaders of all shapes, sizes, and colors get together for the better of the community.
It was beautiful. You know, my parents welcomed other kids, so something was always going on in the Brown household. People would come over for conversations, so it was exciting.
In addition to raising 5 children, Derwin pursued a career in public service as a youth counselor for troubled teens.
He would go to detention centers and also have events in the community, finding strong African-American men to mentor the young African-American boys that needed it.
People would spend the night over our house. I didn't even know who they were, you know, but I knew they were somebody in need, somebody who needed to see probably what we were going to see the next day.
He's always been an involved person, never the type of person to take the back seat or kind of sit back and let things happen. He was always in front.
But since 1979, Derwin's primary occupation was as a member of law enforcement. As one of DeKalb County's first Black patrol officers, he quickly rose through the ranks.
He spent a lot of hours out of his life there studying to complete the sergeant's test, the lieutenant's test, the captain's test. He run his own drug task force.
My father probably worked every department that they have at the police department, from narcotics, you know. He did go away to the FBI Academy for training.
He was committed to the DeKalb County Police Department, just as he was committed to our family. You know, the DeKalb County Police Department was like our family because he was a part of them and he was a part of us, so he made us a part of them.
Derwin also earned a reputation for speaking truth to power.
In order to get promoted and move up, there's an exam process. And Derwin saw how unfair it was because inside of that, you need a merit-based system so that there's equity for everybody, not just minorities, but for everybody. So that if you made sergeant or lieutenant or captain, you could see and expect to receive certain step increases, money, rank, and all the things that go along with that.
So, after more than 20 years on the police force, it seemed right that he become sheriff.
He just saw how things were ran and, he just wasn't comfortable with it, wasn't happy, but he always vowed to go back and make a change.
He was glowing. All his friends, close and not, they were all proud of him because they knew what type of man he was. He was a good man, put in a good position to be able to help a lot of people.
But he would never get that chance. 3 days before he was to be sworn in, Derwin has been murdered in his own driveway.
He was everything to us. Our family fell apart that night, literally.
Minutes away from downtown Atlanta is the quiet enclave of Decatur, Georgia. While homicides in the metro area remain high, this small community is safe by comparison.
Decatur is an old, wealthy enclave. It's progressive, probably more liberal than a lot of places in Georgia.
It's a close-knit community where everybody's sort of near everybody. You can actually walk to school, go to different parks, and feel safe doing that.
It's one of the many reasons why the murder of newly elected Sheriff Derwin Brown comes as such a surprise.
The neighborhoods were shocked. Everybody loved him. Everybody was very proud of him. And now it was just like, what just happened? It's over before he even gets started.
It was a surreal moment. I mean, my phone started ringing off the hook with colleagues and friends and saying, did you hear Derwin Brown was murdered? Derwin Brown was murdered in his driveway. Who in the world would have done this?
Within hours of his death, the entire DeKalb County Police Force has mobilized for investigation.
It was a cold Georgia night. I distinctly remember the crime scene technicians taking different colored flags as they would find a piece of evidence. And I remember there being a lot of red flags. And I asked one of the CSI, I said, why are there so many red flags? And he said, well, that's for each shell casing. And I went, my gosh, there were a lot of shots fired.
17 shell casings are collected in total. They were fired from a Tech-9 semi-automatic pistol. Another clue that this case was going to be unusual.
A Tech-9, it seemed pretty gangster,
The Tech-9 is a very unusual weapon of choice. It can have up to 22 rounds, and it's usually associated with organized crime and street gangs. So it was very telling for the police when they discovered that that type of weapon was used to assassinate Derwin Brown.
It was pretty obvious. This wasn't a random shooting at all. I mean, this was a kill you dead shooting.
However, the shell casings are the only pieces of evidence Derwin's killer left behind. Investigators immediately issue a bolo alert for the gun before sitting down with Derwin's wife Phyllis to get her account of what happened. Phyllis tells police that she and the children had just come home after celebrating Derwin's graduation from a sheriff's training program.
The Peace Officer Standards Training Program is an intensive 6-week course, and you stay there at the location. It involves management, things that are not typically taught to your standard police officer. Phyllis and Brandy, their daughter, had taken a separate car down there.
It was exciting. I can just remember just crying. I was just so happy for him, There was a celebration that some of the workers from the campaign had put together. We came home for a brief stint and went straight to the celebration.
He was to be sworn in the next Monday morning, so there were a lot of well-wishers there. Derwin was the last person to leave about 11 o'clock that night.
A little while later, Phyllis and her son Robert heard Derwin's car pull into the driveway. He would never make it inside.
I remember Phyllis telling me that, they heard his door close and knew that he was out front. And moments later, bullets started raining down.
It sounded like firecrackers. And then it registered it's not firecrackers. And so she looks out the window and she sees my dad's car.
She peeked out the window and totally expected that Derwin was going to be crouched behind one of the cars, that he too had heard the gunshots from next door.
Derwin didn't carry a gun that often, so he probably was not armed.
When she opened the family room door, Derwin had made his way all the way to the front steps. But when she bent down, Derwin was dead.
Phyllis doesn't recall seeing anyone fleeing the area.
Most law enforcement officers, the first thing that they're going to do is talk to neighbors or witnesses or do what we consider a canvass. And that's basically talking to anybody in the area that may have witnessed something or heard something, because that information is evidence as well.
And unfortunately, there don't seem to be any other witnesses.
It's like a dead-end street. And there's only 2 houses to the right of my parents' house, and then there's that dead end.
But detectives are aware that Derwin had made plenty of enemies on his way to becoming sheriff, especially since his election campaign promised to clean up corruption in the department.
You've heard the phrase absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's essentially what you have in the sheriff's office. It's one person being in charge of a multi-million-dollar budget, $30, $40 million a year. And when you have that much authority and that much money, it's really easy to be corrupted.
We had, I believe at the time, 9 Georgia sheriffs who had been indicted and prosecuted for various acts of corruption.
Derwin Brown, this way of doing things was so phenomenal that, and doing this, he also got some other people on board with him because it was so very obvious what was going on in the sheriff's office throughout the years.
My father saw it, he investigated it, and he knew that something had to change.
In 1996, hosting the Olympics put Atlanta on the center of the world stage, but a deadly bombing would put the city on edge.
1 person was killed and 111 people were injured. The security officer that was accused and was later exonerated, he did not have anything to do with the bombing that left a bad taste in everybody's mouth.
The image of Atlanta law enforcement was left tarnished, something residents would not soon forget. DeKalb County is one of the largest and most diverse in the state of Georgia. It is also one of the more affluent. But like the city of Atlanta, DeKalb also has a complicated history.
DeKalb is made up of 2 communities. There's South DeKalb and there's North DeKalb. North DeKalb is predominantly white. South DeKalb is predominantly black.
The county is also home to a monolithic Confederate memorial carving called Stone Mountain.
Most people know that DeKalb County or Stone Mountain is the foundation or the birthplace of the KKK. So there's always been a diversity division within DeKalb County.
They were trying to get it removed, but it was voted against. We still have some problems, but it's not like it was.
DeKalb County law enforcement has also been a notorious hotbed of corruption.
Everybody that's been in law enforcement and lived in DeKalb County any length of time already know about that sheriff department. We talking about 50 years back. Every sheriff of DeKalb County has gone to prison or jail. That is how deep the corruption is.
It had such a good old boys mentality and spirit. I mean, if you had money, you could exchange money for contracts and favors. Everybody knew that.
By the late 1990s, however, political power in the area had begun to change hands.
What happens in communities when you start seeing a demographic shift, usually the political shift follows it. You had a sort of white political structure that was governing white county commissioners and a white sheriff, and that all changed. We elected an African-American
A lot of African Americans were very encouraged by that. They said, it's finally our opportunity to be successful in politics and in commerce.
When Derwin Brown won his bid to become sheriff, he vowed to clean up the office once and for all.
Derwin Brown was also aware of the fact that it was corruption in that department because he was once a part of that department and knew the ins and outs of that. Derwin Brown also was very dedicated to his job, very dedicated to his family, and very dedicated to the people of DeKalb County.
You're fighting for your people and you're fighting for what's right, and he didn't waver from that.
So as news of his murder becomes a national story, DeKalb County gets an interim sheriff, and investigators are feeling the pressure to find his killer.
They sought to bring in some of the top law enforcement individuals within those different organizations, the GBI, the FBI, the DOJ, to make sure an objective investigation was going to be conducted because they knew all eyes were on them.
I got a phone call, which midday following morning said, hey, come to headquarters, chief's from the task force, and you're in it.
We knew it was not domestic. We knew it was not a robbery gone bad. There are multiple people with motives to assassinate the sheriff-elect.
And one of the first people the task force decides to look into is the former sheriff, 59-year-old Sidney Dorsey.
Because that's who Derwin Brown defeated in the election.
Dorsey was the first Black elected sheriff, I think, in this county.
Before running for office in DeKalb County, Mr. Dorsey had been a detective in the Atlanta Police Department. His claim to fame came during the Atlanta missing and murdered children's case, where he was one of the detectives.
The Atlanta child murder case terrorized the city from 1979 to 1981. Dorsey was one of the lead investigators and also played a role in reopening the case after Wayne Williams was convicted.
He felt that there were other parties or individuals that could have been involved with all the child murders, that it was not an individual person. And he was one of the lead advocates to have the case reopened after Wayne Williams was sentenced.
As his career progressed, he developed a reputation for being a bit of a cowboy.
One time he fired his weapon at the Atlanta Police Department inside the squad room. There's a story that he shot a kid that was hiding underneath a house. And he shot a man and killed him in a dispute at a gas pump.
One witness said he basically executed the guy. Started out as a murder charge, went to manslaughter, and then eventually, went away.
When he was elected sheriff in 1996, Dorsey seemed to build on that reputation as a forceful leader.
The thing I remembered about him the most was his persona. His was like larger than life whenever you would be around him.
He dressed in a uniform that had the epaulets of a South American dictator.
But 4 years later, as the 2000 election unfolded, news broke that he was under investigation by the GBI for abusing his power for personal gain.
Sidney Dorsey was using some of the prison labor for his wife's personal home or friends' personal projects at home.
Using county resources and, deputies to go to another state just to fix your daughter's car. And the deputy signed to pick up his son, at school, every day.
Not maybe the biggest, but very important, was that he was using sheriff deputies as a part of his security company.
Amazingly, in Georgia, a sheriff can own a private security firm. The sheriff can stock that private security firm with deputies from his sheriff's department in uniform.
So that pretty much sealed Sidney Dorsey's fate in terms of getting reelected.
And as detectives dig further into the GBI's corruption investigation, they find something else.
It was during that time that a female informed me that The sheriff had offered her a position as the first African-American female bondswoman in DeKalb County, but she had a tough price to pay for that position.
Sheriff Dorsey was taking $10,000 a month just to keep a bonding company, inside his jail. And he was making her have sex with him.
Surprisingly, she claims that Dorsey didn't have any plans to give up his title.
She was talking to Mr. Dorsey about what was he going to do when Derwin Brown became sheriff. And in her words, she said that Sheriff Dorsey told her that Derwin Brown would never become sheriff. And she said, "Why do you say that, Sidney?" And he went like this and didn't say anything else.
The residents of Decatur, Georgia, are used to living in the shadow of Metro Atlanta. But now, the town has been thrust into the spotlight with the murder of Sheriff Derwin Brown.
As you can imagine, once this murder occurred, there was incredible, intense publicity, not just here in Georgia, but nationwide, New York Times, and Europe as well.
The community of DeKalb County found out that Sidney Dorsey was a suspect through one of the local media reporters that had leaked that he was under GBI investigation.
They were looking at people that were tied to the sheriff's department that possibly were losing money or contracts or jobs.
On January 4th, 2001, the investigators questioned Dorsey. He denies any involvement in the murder and the corruption scandal that caused him to lose the election.
He said that he and I didn't do anything that other sheriffs didn't do. He really, really believed that he wasn't corrupt. He was just doing what all the other sheriffs had done.
He surrounded himself with people who stood up, and he held news conferences to talk about how the Cox organization, which was the owner of the television station I worked for, had racist intent and wanted him removed from office.
Dorsey acknowledges his affair with the bondswoman, but denies her claim that he intended to prevent Derwin Brown from taking office.
His answer was, I would be crazy to do such a thing when the focus would be directly on me.
Sidney Dorsey's alibi was his wife, Sherry. She confirmed that he was with her during the time period that the crime actually occurred.
Mr. Dorsey was with his wife. There's no question about that.
But there was zero evidence that he would have done it, and it was unthinkable to think he would have done it.
But as we all know, spouses can be dishonest and can lie. That really didn't mean anything because he was a smart and savvy enough guy to have planned this and planned it in a way where nothing pointed back to him.
With Sheriff Dorsey seemingly in the clear, investigators turned to someone else who stood to lose from Derwin Brown's election. 35-year-old Patrick Cuffey.
Cuffey was a deputy at the DeKalb County Sheriff's Department under Sidney Dorsey.
Patrick Cuffey was from the Virgin Islands. He met Sidney Dorsey when Sidney Dorsey was a resource officer with the Atlanta Police Department in Patrick Cuffey's middle school. Patrick Cuffey immediately
So he was Dorsey's boy. He was able to get away with it.
He's making $100,000 a year, and then he had to go to work.
He had been promised a position, a new position within law enforcement in DeKalb County. So it's not a leap to think that he would be involved with the assassination, because when Sidney Dorsey was not reelected, it killed everybody's hopes of all these jobs and money that they had been promised.
When investigators question Patrick Cuffey, he's hostile towards them.
He refused to sit down. He refused to take his sheriff's hat off. He refused to cooperate. The anger and venom in his voice was very apparent.
Patrick Cuffey did have an alibi. He was with friends during the murder.
He said there were 4 of them at his house lifting weights.
With 2 of the most likely suspects cleared, investigators are running out of leads.
To be honest with you, the case was dead in the water. We had no evidence that, other than our gut feelings and about who was involved.
As the weeks turn into months, the task force conducts more than 300 interviews and posts a reward for $71,500. Then, in March of 2001, 3 months after Derwin Brown's murder, investigators finally get a break in the case when their number 2 suspect pops back up on their radar.
Patrick Cuffey had lost his job at the sheriff's department, so he had no means of income. And so he had connections to people that sold marijuana. He made arrangements with some people he knew to transport a bale of marijuana from the islands into the States. And Patrick Cuffey had to come up with the seed money to get the marijuana into the country. It was the last money he had. He got double-crossed. The people that he did the dope deal with never delivered the dope.
There's a shootout at Patrick Cuffey's house. Multiple shots were fired. And in the middle of all of this, 1 person was killed.
The police went out and arrested Patrick Cuffey.
Desperate to avoid jail, Cuffey tells the task force he's ready to come clean about Derwin's death.
In exchange for complete immunity, Mr. Cuffey would provide us information about who was responsible for the murder of Sheriff-elect Derwin Brown.
Sidney Dorsey was well known in Atlanta for his work on what became known as the Atlanta child murders. In 1979, the bodies of 2 missing 14-year-old boys were found in a wooded area.
Over a 2-year period, 26 additional bodies were discovered in 2 adults. They clearly saw that there was some type of a serial killer that was active within the city of Atlanta.
Dorsey was praised for his continuing work on the unsolved cases.
So people were just stunned at the allegation that he may have been involved with Derwin Brown's assassination.
After one of the most expansive murder investigations in Georgia history, the DeKalb County Task Force finally seems to be closing in on Derwin Brown's killer. After being caught in a drug deal gone bad, former DeKalb County Deputy Patrick Cuffey has offered up a confession to avoid jail time.
So Paul Skyers worked security for Dorsey. David Ramsey worked security. Melvin Walker was a deputy. And Patrick Cuffey worked both jobs.
Melvin Walker and Patrick Cuffey had been given termination letters, and the talk was, oh, what are we going to do, once Derwin Brown becomes sheriff?
According to Cuffey, the 4 decided to eliminate the problem by killing Derwin. David Ramsey provided the gun.
They actually drew straws as to see who was going to fire the murder weapon, and Melvin Walker got the short straw.
On the night of December 15th, they put their plan into action.
They hid at a house across the way from Derwin Brown. They unscrewed the light bulb so that they wouldn't be seen there.
Paul Skyers was the getaway driver. He stayed in the car when Ramsey, Cuffey, and Walker went to the house.
When they seen my father walking down the driveway, that's when they pursued him.
Walker had the Intratec 9, and Walker fired all the shots.
After they killed Derwin Brown, they jumped in the car and they went back to Patrick Cuffey's home. Their alibi was going to be that they were all at Patrick Cuffey's.
But that's not all. Although Cuffey and his accomplices all had reason to want Derwin Brown eliminated, he claims they were actually acting on the orders of someone else.
Shortly after the election, Sidney Dorsey called Patrick Cuffey to his home, and Sidney Dorsey wrote down on a piece of paper, "Kill Derwin Brown."
Cuffey read the note, and Dorsey took the note back and ate it.
Cuffey told me that Dorsey had convinced them that he was truly a person that was harming the community. And the night they killed Derwin Brown, they hated him. They wanted to end his life.
Paul Skyers is the first to be arrested. Like Cuffey, he makes a deal for immunity in exchange for his testimony. He even tells investigators where they can find the murder weapon.
He had dismantled the Intratec 9, threw it down a sewer, and we were able to bring the parts back up. Unfortunately, we were not able to assemble it to fire it, but there was an Intratec 9 that certainly could have been the murder weapon.
On December 17th of 2001, almost a year to the day after Derwin Brown was killed, Melvin Walker and David Ramsey are indicted. But on November 30th, Sidney Dorsey surprises everyone by turning himself in.
They made him do a perk walk, and he was in the orange jumpsuit and shackled.
That was a sad day in DeKalb County history. A sitting sheriff assassinates or orchestrates the assassination of an incoming sheriff who beat him out of office.
While Dorsey continues to fight the charges, Melvin Walker and David Ramsey are tried in 2002.
The strategy was first to prosecute the shooter and the accomplice based largely on the testimony of Mr. Cuffey and Mr. Skyers. We had the corroboration, we had a gun, we had the person who actually sold the Intratec 9 to Mr. Ramsey.
But their primary witness, Patrick Cuffey, unexpectedly backs out on his deal.
He was defiant, and he argued with the defense lawyers.
You know, you're insulting my intelligence. Who are you to not believe what I am saying?
As a result, Walker and Ramsey are both acquitted.
It was a devastating blow to us. The Atlanta papers called for my resignation.
The city of Atlanta and the district attorney's office are both reeling from the shocking acquittal of the two suspects in the murder of Sheriff Derwin Brown.
As a reporter, I had no confidence that Sidney Dorsey was going to be convicted. I felt as though without physical evidence, the jury wouldn't send a man to prison for the rest of his life.
In the weeks leading up to the trial, Dorsey's lawyer asked for a change of venue.
The pretrial publicity in this community and the Atlanta media market was overwhelming. And I think it would have been hard to get a fair and unbiased jury from either side.
The request is granted, and the trial is moved to Albany, Georgia, 180 miles south of DeKalb County.
Albany, Georgia. It's a very, very different place than DeKalb County, Georgia. It's a much more rural community. Law and order is much more respected there.
In June of 2002, Sidney Dorsey's trial begins, and prosecutors employ a new strategy. Instead of focusing solely on the murder, they include charges of widespread corruption as well.
We had two trials The first case was going to be the racketeering. So we spent the first week and a half solely trying a racketeering case.
They had the evidence that they needed to be able to charge him with corruption and racketeering. They just didn't have what they needed in regards to being able to charge him with the murder of Derwin Brown.
By the time Cuffey testified this time, the jury had already made up their minds that Mr. Dorsey was corrupt. Then we just had to prove he was corrupt enough to plan this murder.
They presented a much more toned-down Cuffey. You know, he wasn't as quarrelsome, and they didn't change the case at all in terms of how the murder went down.
However, Dorsey's defense pokes holes in the prosecution's case at every turn.
They maintained his innocence, he said. He said, Cuffey lied, and I promise you he lied. And he said, and I didn't do anything that other sheriffs didn't do. I didn't do anything wrong.
The jurors felt like they couldn't almost determine who was telling the truth because there were so many lies being told.
They came back and said, we're hopelessly deadlocked. We can't reach a verdict. Judge Cynthia Becker sent the jury back in and said, try again. As they weighed the stories, it was overwhelmingly obvious that Sidney Dorsey was not only involved in the murder, but ordered the murder. And they did not want the crime to go unpunished. And about an hour and a half later, they came back and they had voted to convict Sidney Dorsey.
On July 10th, 2002, Sidney Dorsey is found guilty of the murder of Derwin Brown, as well as 11 counts of racketeering.
He was stone-faced, no reaction at all, didn't flinch. He just took it.
There was an immediate emotional release on Phyllis's part, and I felt for her. I was so happy that she was able to have that moment.
Sidney Dorsey is sentenced to life in prison. 3 years later, Melvin Walker and David Ramsey once again face charges in the death of Derwin Brown. This time, under a federal murder for hire statute.
In the United States, you can be tried for a federal crime even if you've been acquitted of a similar charge in state court. And that's exactly what happened to Melvin Walker and David Ramsey.
Both are found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. However, Patrick Cuffey and Paul Skyers remain free men.
It's hard for me to feel like some justice has come from it because you still got Cuffey and Skyers walking around, living their best life wherever they are.
It makes me no different because they already done killed my father. They done took the best thing I had, and it's gone. Ain't no coming back from that.
Justice may have been served, but for the people of Atlanta, it was a bittersweet victory. Derwin Brown will always be remembered as a man who died trying to make a difference in their lives.
He would have made the Cobb County Sheriff Department the role model of this whole state of Georgia.
I want people to remember the love that he had for the people. Because all in all, this was what this was all about. He wanted to make sure that the Cobb County citizens were being done right. And that's what he died for.
Columbus, Ohio is often described as a big city with a small town personality. It's also one of the safest places in the country. But for some of the city's residents, nothing could be further from the truth. For all its charm, Columbus is plagued by poverty. And for one family, the struggle to survive would ultimately end in tragedy. Founded in the 18th
100,000+ people, 14th largest city in the country.
And it's home to one of the largest universities in the United States.
Ohio State University has a rich tradition of being the land-grant college, open public university, very accepting. 50,000 students, a small city in itself. And they have expanded with hospitals and research and laboratories and agricultural sciences at Ohio State, which makes it just a huge, sprawling complex.
Not only do we have the Ohio State University, the Buckeyes, but we also have a sense of growth. Columbus is growing like you wouldn't believe. People are moving here, and not just people who just want to raise a great family.
North Linden, it's an inner ring neighborhood and the ring of I-270, which is our beltway that goes around Columbus. So it's within that more urban core, I guess. A lot of folks live there. A lot of people are really loyal to North Linden because I think it is an older community, and they feel a real sense of kinship and neighborhood there.
But most of the families that reside in North Linden aren't lucky enough to experience the prosperity enjoyed by the rest of the city. And those families are disproportionately affected by the city's most violent crimes. In the early morning hours of January 18, 2008, Columbus police receive an emergency call about a shooting in the neighborhood.
911, what's the emergency? My brother just got shot. I'm not really sure. My mom is outside. She's handicapped.
The 911 caller was Diane Lewis. She said that there had been a shooting. She needed someone to come out.
Before an officer is dispatched, they want to assess what type of call it is so they know what they're walking into. If it's domestic violence, or it's burglary, or it's theft, or it's an active shooter.
It became clear very quickly that it was some kind of home invasion, multiple suspects, masked, armed with guns, and demanding money.
There was a struggle, a gunshot, and they fled. This whole thing was done in 60 seconds from start to finish.
When officers arrive, they find Diane attempting CPR on the victim, 17-year-old Dennis Lewis.
I found a shallow heartbeat. I'm about to start compressions and I'm on top of him. And the police were behind me with a double-barrel shotgun. Freeze.
She's covered in blood because she had been holding him. And so they're telling her, get down. They didn't know if she was involved. Like, they didn't know what was going on. So they're screaming at her and she's screaming back.
I just start losing it. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm pregnant. That's my brother. Save him. And they start compressions and they ripped his shirt off and they threw him on the gurney.
Diane said she knew when they carried Dennis out, by the way that his arm was hanging, that he wasn't going to make it.
That's when I got word of it. He was deceased.
It was like a dream. It was like, this can't be real.
A good kid from an East High School, why would this have happened to him?
For twin brothers, Darius and Dennis Lewis, life on the city's east side was full of challenges.
The Linden area, if you know anything about Columbus, Ohio, is not too good of it.
Stamps and government assistance.
But despite those hurdles, the boys managed to find some normalcy, due in large part to the influence of their mother, April, and their sister, Diane.
Having their mom and having their sister be so involved in their achievement and in their accomplishments and in their success was very important to their upbringing.
My brother Dennis and I, we were two peas in a pod, literally. We would do everything together. We just had different colors, so mom could tell us apart.
Dennis was a firecracker. Oh my God. Darius was more on the reserved side. He was all about the books. He was all about studying.
Dennis was the outgoing one. Darius was very shy and kept to himself. Dennis had dreadlocks and Darius was shaved. He had a short hair, gay, a fade.
They were total opposite, but the love that they had for one another, it never changed. You know, they just had a funny way of showing it.
From a young age, the Lewis brothers had the kind of sibling rivalry that pushed both to become better.
There's always a good twin. There's always a bad twin. But when you got two good twins, I mean great twins that compete with each other to do better, that's that inner drive. I would ask one of them about their grades, and the other one would answer with his grades. Like if they both had science, they would say, okay, I got an A, but he got a B. So they competed with everything. They found out the right way to win, and they wouldn't rub it in your face when they beat you either. They were good kids.
Given their environment, they definitely took refuge in not only each other and their family, but being devoted students, being the best that they could at marching band. Band was really a big thing for both of them.
Everyone who was a part of the band was like a family. For all of us, it was kind of like that home away from home. There you had mentors, you had older brothers.
Our band director, she always said, do what you have to do until you do what you want to do. So that's something that always stuck with me.
Well, we met through East High School marching band. Darius and Dennis both, just doing everything they could to build up that resume that the colleges want to see so that they could then go to a good school and then get a better job and then have a better career and then move on that path.
Essentially, our plan was to get our mom out of poverty.
Miss April had multiple sclerosis that she was dealing with, and a lot of people who knew Dennis and Darius knew that they were taking care of her.
They were kids that were succeeding in a bad neighborhood with a mother who was disabled. It was kind of a rarity for those kids to be doing so well with so little.
We worked part-time jobs. We still, managed to involve ourselves in sports and carry straight A's while in high school.
Darius and I moved in together when I was moving out of my parents' house because I was 18. Darius moved out just maybe 2 months shy of his 18th birthday. And Dennis stayed at the house with April, with their mom.
My brother, he was actually going to go to Florida for college, and I was going to stay at Ohio State University. I wanted to stay close to my mom.
But their dreams of a brighter future were shattered when Dennis was shot and killed. Now both the community and investigators want to know why.
You just don't think stuff like that will happen to somebody, especially somebody like Dennis.
There was so many ideas going through my head. Like, why would this happen to my family? Why would this happen to my brother?
On January 18th, 2008, masked gunmen claimed the life of 17-year-old Dennis Lewis during an apparent break-in. Unfortunately, for the Black community in North Linden, it was simply business as usual.
At that time, Linden had 4 years in a row, a student was killed. They had a street named Oak and Kill.
Definitely not the most idealistic place to grow up.
I became a reporter here in 1985. We immediately started covering an insurgence of crack cocaine into the area, the crack world. It escalated into the 90s in a rash of homicides over drug turf.
It's not uncommon that there'll be beefs between kids in different gangs. And a lot of it, I think, is drug-related.
It was just back and forth. And we were just in the middle of it.
Every city has a hood. Not a ghetto, but a hood. You know what I'm saying? We have places that you better not be after a certain time. You better lock your cars when you're driving through.
At the time, being a kid, I didn't really see too much wrong with it. I guess you could say I was kind of blind to some of the activity that may have been going on.
We normalize it, but we have no other outlet. I mean, we don't have money to move and things of that sort to get out of the neighborhood. You live in the ghetto because it's affordable. And we just didn't have a choice.
But even in East Columbus, it's uncommon for a group of masked gunmen to break into a house. Since Darius was living with his girlfriend, the only two people home that night were Dennis and his mother, April.
When you are interviewing a family member of the victim, this has to be one of the most difficult times in their life. It doesn't mean that you can't go in there and get the answers that you need, but having patience is very important.
They interviewed April repeatedly about, could you identify a voice? What were they wearing? And she did the best she could, but she was obviously traumatized by finding out her son had been killed.
April told them that as she was asleep on the sofa, she could hear someone trying to access the side door.
She stated that there was 4 to 5 men that came into the house and they put a gun to her head.
Whoever it was said, freeze, and if you move, I'm gonna blow your head off.
She described them as young, she described them as male, she described them as black. She didn't indicate that she'd had any direct conversation with any of them.
To police, the scene that Dennis and Darius's mother describes begins to sound like a robbery gone wrong.
They kept asking where the money was as if they knew there had been money in that house before.
They were running through the home, opening up cupboards, dumping out shoe boxes, just ransacking the house.
She told them that I don't have any money. I don't have anything. We're poor.
The noise from that assault roused Dennis from his bedroom, which was on the first floor, and he came to the aid of his mother. While one held a gun to April Lewis's head, another attacked Dennis.
Dennis then said, "You're not gonna hurt my mother," and came out and started to fight them. And the fight went on for quite some time.
He was fighting for his life. And that was the only way that they were gonna get out of there was to kill him.
Dennis was in control of the fight that was happening inside the house, and it took someone having to use a weapon in order to gain control of the fight between the two.
I can only imagine being attacked. I know he didn't know what was going on. That's when she heard the gunshot.
Then, as quickly as they'd come, the attackers fled the scene. April immediately called for help.
His mom, because she was sick at the time, had to crawl outside on the porch and yell for her daughter, who was a couple houses down.
All of a sudden I hear, Don, they shot your brother. Please come help us. As soon as she said Don, I knew that was my mom. I grabbed my cell phone and I dialed 911. I said I need an ambulance.
Forensic evidence paints an even clearer picture of the struggle between Dennis and the intruders.
There had been a very valiant, bloodied fight and went off into 2 different bedrooms, as well as a hallway, into the attic, going upstairs.
There was splats of blood on the bed. And then there was like this long wall with all this blood on it.
This one print in particular got their attention because they observed ridge detail in the blood, which they knew could then lead them to a possible fingerprint identification.
There are only 2 ways, basically, to get a print in blood. One is it would be as if you have a small amount of blood on your finger and you touch the wall. If you have a small amount of blood that's drying on the wall and you would put your finger on it, you could leave a blood print that way as well. Either of those ways would require you to be at the location at the time of the incident.
The detective instructed the crime scene search unit to collect that piece of drywall. They actually physically cut the drywall off of the wall. That was packaged up and then sent back to the property room.
As investigators continue to search for clues, Diane Lewis makes the most difficult phone call of her life.
Sometime in the middle of the night, I hear his phone ringing. And then he's like, "What? Diane, slow down. And he sits up in the bed, and at that point, I felt something was wrong. I could tell that there was something going on.
I received a phone call early in the morning. It was from my sister, and she said that your brother has been shot. I threw on a coat and my slippers, and I just jumped in my car. I put the foot to the pedal, and I just drove so fast. He parked his car in the middle of the street, got out, didn't shut the door. The yellow tape was already up. He ran to that house.
By then, it had become an active crime scene, and anybody approaching would have been stopped and then questioned. And he identified himself as Darius Lewis.
When Darius is told the details of what happened, he finds it hard to believe anyone would try to rob his mother's house.
It wasn't like she had big TVs and expensive things in her house. It wasn't like they had a bunch of stuff worth stealing. So why would someone even break into the house?
In fact, he thinks the intruders were after someone else.
I had a cousin, and his name is Joey. He would come over sporadically, eat and things of that sort. 2 weeks prior to me moving out, I see him packaging up pills and things of that sort, and I was very uncomfortable. For me, it was something heavy. I was like, I don't want to be involved in any of, whatever's going on here.
The theory was that word on the street was Joey may have kept money and or drugs at the house.
He was a likely target of this robbery, even though he wasn't there.
Hours
Kids who were succeeding from a background where oftentimes you don't see kids succeed, and it just, amplified the sadness of the story.
I was tired of it. I was tired of dealing with another young person losing their lives in my city. I was tired of having to report that.
This is a rising star in the community. He was a standout student, really remarkable with a future ahead of him.
I just couldn't grasp the fact that my twin would not be here with me. It's like, what do I do now?
Darius believes his brother may have been killed accidentally, and that his cousin Joey was the intended target of the robbery.
Joey Westbrook had lived in the house 3 or 4 nights a week. He was involved in a drug trade, moving large sums into southern Ohio.
Joey would have people over. Always had a different girl. Always had his hair done and, Versace glasses.
He drove a little fancier car, flashed money, was out all hours of the night. He made no secret of the fact that he was dealing in drugs.
Part of why Darius moved out of the house was that he had come downstairs at one point in time and saw Joey counting pills.
The motive that seemed to ultimately make the most sense to us was they'd targeted the house thinking that the dope connection still existed.
But Joey wasn't there when the break-in occurred.
He was already in jail. He was locked up.
The day before the homicide, Joey was picked up on charges in southern Ohio and I believe the city of Portsmouth and locked up.
At time of his arrest, he had over $12,000 drugs and cash on him.
So did the intruders pick the wrong time for their break-in? Or had they gone there expecting the house to be empty?
They weren't from that neighborhood because they didn't know what house they were going into. They went in, thought it'd be easy to just smash everything up, grab what they want, and be out.
They might have made that miscalculation and instead encountered a fit 17-year-old kid trying to defend his mom.
Investigators pay a visit to Joey Westbrook in prison. To their surprise, he admits to keeping drugs in the house and agrees with their theory about the break-in.
He believes that someone was looking for his stash of drugs and his money the night Dennis Lewis was murdered.
Unfortunately, Joey has no idea who it might have been.
He was moving large amounts of drugs in and out of Columbus and Scioto County as a pipeline, and he had a lot of enemies.
In a city that large, you're literally looking at hundreds of potential suspects. And without having any evidence, you're really looking for a needle in a haystack.
On January 24th, Dennis Lewis is laid to rest. Mourners from all over the city of Columbus come to pay their respects.
The funeral was over 1,800 people.
So you had a lot of faculty, you had students, you had family, you had just community.
A lot of people spoke, a lot of people came. It was like celebrity status. I've never seen anything like it in my life. Our mayor, he said that he wanted to pay for everything. He has to have the best of everything. And he paid for my brother's funeral.
When the mayor of your city is talking about you, you know how important you are.
Darius leads the choir in song and delivers a heartfelt message to his brother's killers.
I do remember saying that whomever did this, I forgive them. There's no malice, but please step forward.
His appeal goes unanswered. Weeks pass with no further leads, and Columbus police come under pressure to find answers.
It was a month, no arrests had been made, and if there's not an arrest in the first few days, the odds drop dramatically that there's going to be an arrest.
During the aftermath, Darius was very close with the detectives that were investigating the case. He spoke to them almost daily, very cooperative, tried to, give leads.
The coverage of an average homicide may only last a day. That wasn't the case here. This, it grabbed television headlines and dominated crime coverage.
The community was absolutely reeling, along with the family. I mean, this was just an utter shock and just so devastating.
Murders in Columbus, Ohio are an all too common reality, especially for residents of the city's poorest neighborhoods. But after a month of investigating the shooting death of 17-year-old Dennis Lewis, detectives still have no suspects.
The case had kind of gone quiet, and in the meantime, other homicides are happening in the city. So the case sort of ended up on the to-do list.
There were a lot of rumors that were going around. Is somebody going to be man enough or woman enough or be honest enough to come forward and say, hey, you know what I'm saying, it was me?
Then, in February of 2008, there's a breakthrough in the form of new forensic evidence.
While the police are conducting their investigation, the fingerprint examiners are going through all of the different prints that they had developed at the scene to see if they could develop a suspect from those. At one point in time, the fingerprint identifier came and said, I've got this print, and you're not going to believe who it comes back to.
They had recovered a print in blood off of the wall. That print came back to Darius Lewis.
They were so shocked at the results that they had 3 other fingerprint examiners double-check to verify.
I mean, this wasn't a case where people wanted to believe it.
They did identify 16 points of comparison on this fingerprint, linking it to Darius Lewis. There was no doubt this was his fingerprint.
The fact that Darius's fingerprints are in the house isn't surprising or suspicious, but the timing is.
Most people don't know that fingerprints or palm prints can last up to as much as 20 years.
What made the print remarkable and unique was that allegedly it was in blood.
In order for you to leave a bloody handprint, you have to be there when this crime occurred, get blood on your hand, and then lean against the wall. That's the only way that's going to happen.
Quite frankly, you don't need an additional investigation with respect to him. You know he was there.
Instead of arresting Darius, police decide to lure him in and try to get a confession.
February 13th is when I got the call. They say, hey, we have leads. We want you to come identify some people.
They tricked him. They told him, you can go to school after you're done. Just got a few questions for you.
And then I end up grilled, interrogated.
Well, how could we explain one of your palm prints being in the crime scene?
My palm prints?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Okay.
My blood?
That moment of being, blamed of killing your twin, that was total craziness. My whole insides literally feel like it fell out. I was trying to say, like, what do you mean? What do you mean? I didn't understand it.
This is crazy.
It's upsetting.
This is crazy. I swear to God, this is crazy.
Scientifically, your print is in your brother's blood.
I'm like, this is not right. This is not right.
Despite the intense questioning, Darius refuses to give in.
This is not happening.
That's your print. That's your brother's blood. That is happening.
That's nonsense.
Be back.
He could not explain the fingerprint on the wall other than he lived there, and he would never hurt his mother or his brother. His story was consistent throughout, that he was not there and he would not do this.
Darius was interrogated by one of Columbus Police's best interrogators, and at no point did he falter or flinch or anything.
He left me for a little moment, and I'm just like praying, like, what is going on? What is going on? I do not understand. Lord, why is this happening to me?
This is not real.
It's some of the most disturbing tape you can ever watch because he is absolutely beside himself, shaking and holding himself, and there must be a mistake.
He came back in, and that's when they arrested me. I was charged with aggravated robbery, aggravated murder, aggravated kidnapping.
He is being accused of the most heinous crime, bludgeoning his brother to death. And
Not only was it impossible for who he was and what his character was and what the crime was, but it was impossible physically because he was on the south side of town with me in our home, in our bed.
I got a phone call and it was like, cut on the news. I was just like, you gotta be kidding me. This can't be real. You start to think like, well, damn, did he really do this?
After a month of investigation, Columbus police have charged Darius Lewis with the murder of his twin brother, Dennis. Once the story hits local media, the reaction is polarizing.
the media response to Darius being arrested, as you can imagine, took a very ugly turn. It really seemed that Dennis was this just remarkable young man, and then here's this either jealous or lesser twin who's now gone and taken his life. And that was definitely the portrayal that was occurring.
We started to see division amongst some people who felt that maybe he would have done it. Some people who were defending the fact that, no, he wouldn't have done it.
When we found out Darius was arrested and charged, anger. They wanted to change the narrative and close the case. And a lot of people believe that they picked Darius because they had nobody else.
It very much looked like they just want to close this case. They just want to say, well, we solved it.
It went from them putting up a picture of him in school to a picture of him that I'd have been like, okay, he did that if I didn't know the young man.
We had this dichotomy of family denial, police insistence for months, while Darius Lewis professed his innocence in jail.
I told him, if we are the last two standing, I will never leave you lonely.
As he awaits his trial, Darius keeps his spirits up by focusing on his studies and on God.
I was confined physically, but mentally, I was still open. The school, they brought my books up there. I still graduated basically while I was incarcerated. Psychologically getting through those days, it was more of my spiritual connection. There was not a day that I did not read my Bible. I'm not built to break. So that was my motto throughout the whole entire ordeal. I'm not built to break. I really felt in my heart of hearts, I was going to be released. I was going to be vindicated of all charges, exonerated.
But Darius's faith will be tested. At his pretrial hearing, the court rules he will be tried as an adult. If convicted, Darius could spend the rest of his life in prison.
There's different things that can assist a judge in making a decision whether a child or youth is going to be charged as an adult. The type of crime, the brutality or viciousness of the crime. Anybody over the age of 13 can be charged as an adult.
After the court hearing, Adam Neiman was officially appointed as Darius's counsel. And one of the first things that we did was go down to the jail to meet him so that we could get his side of the story. Adam and I were just both struck by Darius and how inconceivable it is that this person sitting in front of us is even capable of carrying out the things that he was accused of doing.
Everyone said it. This isn't the kind of kid who would do this. There was a bloody print saying otherwise.
On March 9th, 2009, more than a year after being arrested for the brutal murder of his twin brother, the trial of Darius Lewis finally begins.
This is a huge media case. True TV was in the courtroom recording. My grandmother in Canada was watching the coverage.
Darius Lewis was wearing a suit, and I believe he carried a Bible to trial with him.
As the prosecution makes their opening arguments, it becomes clear that the case will come down to a single piece of evidence.
In a typical burglary case, you get the print and you say, hey, that person's never been in the house before. If there are prints there, they must be the burglar. In this particular case, because it was at the residence where Darius had slept and been raised, the fact that the print was in blood was the significant factor.
Prosecution railed that Darius was lying, that he had to have committed this crime. He couldn't explain away this palm print.
If you're a prosecutor, I'm not sure if there's a more powerful piece of evidence than a bloody print.
In addition to having easy access to the house, the state argues Darius also had plenty of motive to kill his brother.
Their theory of the case was that Darius's motive for doing the shooting was to get some cash that was in the top drawer of Dennis's dresser that he had been saving up for a car.
This was a robbery. Darius brought accomplices to search the house for his brother's money, and they ended up in a brotherly scuffle.
Maybe it just got out of hand that the crime was not supposed to end in homicide, that this happened because Dennis fought back.
But the defense believes that theory is ridiculous.
I've covered every manner of family homicide. Everything I'd heard didn't indicate to me that there was any kind of bad blood between Dennis and Darius.
These two boys, whatever one had belonged to the other. I mean, if Darius wanted that money, Dennis would have given it to him, no questions asked.
It's just like, I have money. I don't need to do that.
The defense case rested heavily on
It's inconceivable.
They also challenged the validity of the prosecutor's key evidence.
They cross-examined the latent print examiner that we had called to testify, and they raised the issue that the print was in blood.
All we were hearing about was 16 points of comparison, but at no point in time did anyone testify about where the print was located. And it was at
prison for something I didn't do.
It's March of 2009, and the residents of Columbus, Ohio anxiously await a verdict in the trial of Darius Lewis, an honor student accused of murdering his twin brother.
This became a story of biblical proportions. The Cain and Abel story, how a brother could kill a brother. How could this possibly be? We were just waiting for the jury to deliberate. These things can last for days.
I'm trying to, understand, did we convince the jury? Did we do everything that we possibly can? It was surreal. It was a moment to say, they have my life in their hands.
Unexpectedly, the jury returns after only one day. But as it turns out, they haven't reached a decision at all.
One of the jurors had some family issue. Because of that, the juror could not come back to continue deliberations, and therefore you could not have a unanimous jury of 12.
Case was declared a mistrial at the defense request. When the mistrial was declared, there was an audible gasp from the Lewis family, and they wanted closure. They wanted the acquittal. They wanted Darius to come home free. And they knew that they were going to have to go through this again because the prosecution had said openly that we'll seek another trial.
Darius remains in custody, but instead of immediately setting a new trial date, the prosecution and defense reach an agreement. They will first retest the fingerprints found at the crime scene.
I think that's when we showed the evidence of the print, it not being in blood, the prosecution, they were like, okay, to make it all fair, let's test this evidence.
They've raised this issue. We need to make sure, because our whole case is based on the fact that the print is in blood. If the print's not in blood, then we don't have a case.
On August 6, 2009, a forensic expert renders their decision.
The prosecutor's office tested at the lab. We were all present there when it happened. When you're taking a look at the drywall that was cut out in this case, and you can clearly see the bloody handprint that the detective saw at the scene, and then above that print, you see the latent print, which was Darius's print that could have been placed there at any time in the past 4 years. And clearly, they're not in the same location.
The lab person came and told us there was no sign of blood. They had not tested positive for blood.
The mistrial was really a win. It allowed the defense team an opportunity to re-examine the evidence. And in doing so, they discovered that that bloody fingerprint didn't exist, and it helped exonerate their client.
I was happy I had my answer. I was able to do what needed to be done. Half hour later, he walked out of jail.
I go downstairs and Shannon's all on the floor, crying and everything.
I fell to my knees crying, you're going home, you're going home.
I was like, just want to see Dennis. I wanted to see who my brother was.
Procedures so that this hopefully would not happen again in the future.
Since his release, Darius has gone on to help others in his East Columbus community and to realize many of the dreams he and Dennis once shared.
To make it through such a horrible experience and come out to be the productive, successful man that he is just really speaks volume as to who he is as a person.
Even though our brother is gone, he still lives through him. He still lives through him.
I do feel like Dennis is with me. I carry him with me every day. He's here with me.